We're checking, fellas. Uh, Today, I'd like to share with you a message that God gave me a while back. I preach it to my group. It's been a few months, but I want to do a video about it today. So it's about when God sends a queen to do a king's job. Okay. So there's a story that happens in 1 Samuel chapter 15. Okay. Samuel goes to King Saul, first king of Israel. Samuel goes to King Saul and says this. Here, I'll read it for you right now. Samuel says to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, and how he laid wait for him in the way, when he came up out of Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." And Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. So here's what's going on. God sends Samuel, his prophet, to send Saul to utterly destroy this group of people, the Amalekites. Okay? The reason being is that back in Moses' day, around that time, when Israel was getting into the area of the Promised Land and everything, Amalek, the Amalekites, they really gave Israel a hard time, and they were fighting them guerrilla warfare style. They'd come out of nowhere and raid them and steal stuff and kill people, and God was very upset with that, because that was a moment in Israel's history where they were very weak. You know, they just came out of slavery. They just came out of the wilderness. They're tired. Their feet hurt. They're not really battle ready, and they were being kind of taken advantage of because of that. So God says, "I remember what Amalek did. I don't appreciate it." So He sends Saul to go wipe them out, because the Amalekites were, in general, not a very good people. Okay, they weren't going to change. They were the same way then that they were in the beginning, and they were just going to keep causing problems, and God wasn't going to be having that. So Saul goes, and what he ends up doing is he starts taking his 200,000 men, which I imagine is more than there were Amalekites, takes his 200,000 men, and he starts going through the Amalekite land, and he starts killing everybody. And he gets done with all his war, and he gets back to his home city, and Samuel shows up. And Samuel's a little confused, because there's an issue that happened. God told Saul, "Wipe them all out." You heard me read the verse. Every human being, every animal, everything that is breathing will not be breathing because of you. Go do it. So what Saul ended up doing was, he found some sheep that he liked. He found some oxen that he liked, some farm animals. He's like, it's not like a farm animal ever did anything wrong. I'm just going to keep this. And Saul also ended up doing was, he kept the King Agag. Agag was the king of the Amalekites. Saul kept him alive too, and took him prisoner, because Saul wanted a little trophy for what he accomplished. Okay? So Samuel gets there, and he's very confused, very upset. And Samuel said to Saul, I thought that God told you to kill everything." And Saul said, "I did kill everything. I kept a couple animals." Saul ended up saying, trying to find the exact verse, but Saul ended up saying, "Yeah, I kept some animals so that we could sacrifice to the Lord your God." Which isn't at all why he kept it, but he was put on the spot by Samuel, so he kind of had to come up with an excuse in the moment. But Saul, at first, he says, "Well, I did kill everything. I just, right here it is. Chapter 15, verse 15. Saul said, "For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." And Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord hath said to me this night. And he said unto him, Say on. So Samuel's just not having it, okay? Because when God tells you to do something, it is not open to your interpretation. It is not amenable. There is no caveats, additions. There's nothing like that. God told Saul, go do this, and Saul did not. Okay. So what happens is Samuel explains to Saul that God is highly upset and that Saul will be punished for what he has done. And Saul's punishment for not obeying what God said and saving some of the sheep and oxen and saving the king, Saul's punishment for not obeying God was that God said, I would have established your kingdom forever. I would have made sure that your kingdom lasted, but because you've done this, your kingdom's not going to last. You're not going to be king forever now. So, Saul tries to say, oh, come on, it was just a mistake, this and that, and Saul ended up asking Samuel, well, please, let's just go worship God together, and Samuel's like, okay, and so they end up worshiping God, but it was a heart problem with Saul. This is the issue. This is the broad scope issue with King Saul, is that his heart wasn't right. I mean, his heart was so wrong that the Bible says when Samuel anointed Saul to be king, God gave Saul a new heart, and Saul was so corrupt that the new heart that God gave him, he ended up corrupting, because at his core, he wanted himself. He didn't want God. He wanted himself. He wanted to be the king. He wanted to be powerful and do what he wanted, and he didn't want to obey. And what ends up happening is Samuel was sitting there and he was thinking about it for a second, and he looked over at some fellows and he said, hey, that King Agag guy that you spared, bring him over here. So the people brought the king to Samuel, and Samuel pulled out a sword and killed the king and said, I imagine, he didn't say, I'm not quoting the Bible here, but I imagine Samuel probably said something like, well, hey, there you go. At least one of the things that God wanted got done today. Okay. So what Samuel does next is Samuel went home. Samuel went home, and never once did he ever go see Saul again in Saul's entire kingdom. Saul was the king for another 10-ish years or so, and Samuel never once went to see him again. And Samuel went through a really hard time because Samuel loved Saul, absolutely loved him. I mean, I imagine Saul was in a lot of ways like a son to Samuel, because here Samuel is. Samuel was the first prophet, at least the first prophet as we know them. And Saul was the first king, and Samuel anointed Saul. So there was a connection, and that was gone now. And Samuel mourned for quite a while over Saul and what he did and who he had become. So the issue that rose up from this, that would have very easily been prevented had Saul obeyed, is that a little while later, that was 1 Samuel 15. Okay, over in 1 Samuel 30, chapter 30. This is talking about King David now, okay? This is before he's king, though, by the way. So this is regular old David. You may or may not know what David had gone through. I don't want to get into all of it, but David was kind of on the run from Saul because Samuel anointed David to be the next king, and Saul knew about it. So Saul didn't like David at all because David was his replacement. So David was on the run from King Saul, and David ended up having to live with the Philistines, which the people of Israel were at war with. So David had to go live with the enemies because they were nicer to him than Saul was, which is insane. So because David was a man after God's own heart, and he had a good heart, and he was a good man, that even though he was among the enemies, I mean, not all of them, but, the people he interacted with directly, the Philistines that he interacted with directly, they loved David. They gave him his own city. David had about 600 men with him, a little squad, and they all had their wives and kids and their stuff, and they lived in this town called Ziklag in Philistine territory. Okay, that was their place for a while. It was their home. And what ends up happening is that the deal was that for David and his men to live there in Ziklag, that whenever the Philistines would go to war, they knew what a mighty soldier David was and his men, because God was with them. So whenever the Philistines would go to war, the deal was that David and his men go and help the Philistines fight whoever it is they're fighting. Well, one day the Philistines go to war with Israel, with King Saul. So David said, whatever, a deal's a deal, I gotta go. So he brings his men in, and he shows up to the battleground, and what happens is there is a man named Achish. Okay, that's the Philistine that likes David, that David's in a relationship with. Well, all the other Philistine leaders, the warlords, the generals, the commanders, what have you, they see David show up, they see an Israelite show up to help them fight Israelites, and it seems a little screwy to them. Something's a little off. They don't like it, they're not comfortable with it. They're like, in what universe is David not going to turn on us in battle and ambush us, because he's literally Israelite? So we get him out of here. They're telling Achish to make David go, and Achish, he told the Philistines, look, this David guy, he's the real deal. I trust him. I know he's an Israelite, but he's not going to betray us. I promise you. And they wouldn't hear him. They said, no, absolutely not. Send him away. So Achish ends up sending David back home. And so David and his 600 men, they get back home, and they get back to Ziklag. When they show up to Ziklag, all of their wives and kids are gone. All of their stuff is gone, and the city is burning to the ground. And they were devastated. I mean, it was so random. There was no warning, no nothing. They just got back from a normal day, and their wives and their kids are gone, and their city's burning to the ground. They were so bent out of shape, and rightfully so, about that. I mean, some of the men were so broken about it, they wanted to kill David. They said, we're here because of you. They got emotional. What ends up happening, though, is David prays to God. He prays and he says, look, are you okay with me pursuing the people that did this, chasing them and getting our wives and kids back? I need to know if you're going to be with me or not. And God said, go ahead. I'm going to be with you. Don't worry. So what ends up happening is they start chasing these men that did this, and they find an Egyptian in a field. So David finds this Egyptian, and he's really beat up, and he's hungry, and he's tired. And so David and his men, they take the Egyptian in, and they feed him, and they give him water, and so this Egyptian is a servant to the men that did this to David's town. So the Egyptian just completely spills the beans. I mean, he's got a full belly now, so he's ready to talk. So funny thing, the people that burned Ziklag down were Amalekites. They shouldn't exist anymore, but they do. And now, because Saul didn't listen, now David's wife, both of his wives and his children, all of his men's wives and children are gone, because Saul wanted a sheep. So what ends up happening is, because David put God first, he prayed to God. Can you imagine the kind of man you gotta be, that your wife and daughter just got kidnapped and your city is burning to the ground, and your first reaction is to stop and kneel down and pray and wait for an answer from God. I mean, most people would be like, all right, God, they got my wife and kids. I'm gone. I need you with me. But if you're not, oh, well, I got to get my wife and kids back. Not David. David stopped. Something that would seem so like, of course, go after them, bro. Of course. And God said, of course, go after them. But it's the simple fact that shows you that David and Saul had polar opposite hearts. David, in this moment of shock and tension and all these emotions and all these horrible things that they're going through mentally and physically, and oh my gosh, he stopped. He has the spiritual strength to stop and kneel down and say, I'm not going to move until I know you're with me. And God was with him. So they chased after the Amalekites and they caught up to him. And God was with him. And they slew all the Amalekites, most of them. I think a few got away. I'm trying to find the verse where it says. 400 young men. That's what I thought it was. I just didn't want to misquote the Bible. But 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 17, David smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day, and there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men which rode upon camels and fled. So about 400 Amalekites got away. But David got everything back. Him and his men. Every single thing that they had, every wife, every child, everything. They got everything back. And there wasn't a thing missing. And they actually spoiled the Amalekites because the Amalekites had stuff of their own, so they came back with more. But, you know, as nice of an ending as that story might have, you got to remember the simple fact that the reason it had a good ending is because of God, and the reason it had a bad start is because a man did not obey God. Saul was told to kill Amalek because look at what they did to David. Burn his city down, steal his wife and kids, everybody's wives and kids, steal all their... This is who they are. They're not good people. They're going to keep doing this, and they're going to keep multiplying and growing and growing. And so God said, we need to stop this now, so go stop it. It's a very simple thing. And Saul didn't want to. He didn't want to hear it, you know, because the problem is that when Saul stopped and hesitated and started picking through the sheep and oxen, well, that's slowing him down, isn't it? That's wasting time while Amalekites are running away and fleeing into the woods and escaping. And, you know, something else, I like I said, I preached this a few months ago, something I didn't even realize myself fully until after I preached it, but King Saul didn't stop at the kids. He killed them. He saw a 3-year-old and he stabbed him. He saw an old man crossing the street and didn't hesitate, just cut him right down. He saw a pregnant woman walking out of her house, shot her in the head with an arrow. No hesitation, no nothing. But when he saw a farm animal that might look good on his farm, that's when he hesitated. And that is what shows you that Saul's heart was nowhere near God. And so this is, you know, what David experienced with the Amalekites, you know, stealing his wife and kids and his stuff. This is a hard truth about life, man, is that, you know, when you got people in your life that don't obey God, you know, whoever it is, maybe a parent, maybe a spouse, maybe somebody, whoever it is, there's going to be people in your lives that don't obey God, and you're going to pay the price for it, you know, and it's a hard truth about life, because I mean, David was the most honorable man, you know, and he was serving God Foley every single day, and it didn't stop this horrible thing from happening. His wife and kids being kidnapped, and all his stuff being taken, all his men, all their stuff, all their wives and kids, their town being burned down, didn't stop that, no matter how righteous King David may have been, simply because somebody did not obey God. And there's another sort of part to this that I like to show you. It's in the book of Esther. Now, King Saul lived, no, I don't remember. King Saul reigned from I think somewhere around 1020 BC, somewhere around there, okay? Esther was, well, I don't remember exactly what year Esther was, but it was several hundred years later. Maybe I wrote it down, but it was Esther existed several hundred years later, centuries later, because there was Saul, and then David was the next king, and then Solomon, and then a bunch of kings, and a bunch of this, and a bunch of that, and people falling away from God, and God bringing them back, and a whole hundreds of years. And then there was Elijah, and Elisha, and a whole lot of stuff. And then what ends up happening is Israel gets taken captive, and then after Israel has been captive for a while, then that's when Esther's story is. So it's been hundreds of years since Saul. So what ends up happening in Esther, okay? So I'm gonna give you the rundown, just to brush you up on your Queen Esther lore. Okay, so here it is. Persia and Media, okay, that's the country, and this is where the Israelites are now captives. There's not many of them left. There's several thousand. I think. Don't quote me on this. I think about 30,000 thereabouts. Israelites left, but that's nothing compared. 30,000 Israelites left. King Saul had 200,000 soldiers, simply soldiers with him. That this is, they're in dark times. There's not many of them left. There's only about 30,000 in their area. So what ends up happening is, okay, so there's King Ahasuerus. Is also called King Xerxes. I like Xerxes better. It sounds cooler. So King Xerxes is king of Persia and Media. Okay, he has a queen, Vashti. A lot of you may know this. He was having a party one day, and he got a little tipsy, and he said, "Hey man, my wife's pretty hot, and I want to show everybody." So he calls his wife. He sends a messenger, says, "Go bring my wife. I want to show everybody how pretty she is." And so the messenger goes, and Vashti says, "No, I'm not coming. What are you, stupid?" So the king gets kind of upset, and he's sitting there with his boys, and he's like, "What? Did she just tell the king no? This has never happened before. What do I do?" And they said, "If you don't punish her, then every single woman in your country is going to never obey their husband again, because if the queen doesn't do it, why do I have to do it?" So the king was put in a spot, and he made a decision. He exiled Vashti. He removed her from being queen and kicked her out. So now he needs a new queen. So, there's a whole sort of contest that takes place where they say, "All right, round up all the cute girls in the land and bring them to the king. He's going to pick one." So one of them was Hadassah, who's Esther. Now, VeggieTales tells you that Mordecai is her uncle, but I believe the Bible says that it's her cousin. Who knows? VeggieTales is just as trustworthy as the Bible is, so there's really no way to know. But the point is that Esther is an orphan, okay? She grows up in a foreign country. She is an orphan. She lives with her cousin Mordecai. She lives, I imagine, in the hood. in the slums, okay, because she's an outcast. She doesn't belong there. She's a captive, okay. So she grows up, no parents, just her cousin, and she ends up being picked as one of the girls to go try out to be queen. So this is great news for her, I imagine, because she's lived her whole life kind of in the slums, and this is a good opportunity. So she gets to go to the palace and eat really good food and get all dressed up and decked out, and she probably felt very pretty, and it was probably a very nice experience for her. And then what ends up happening is she ends up becoming the queen. Xerxes picked her out of anybody, and so I imagine that even more so was just overwhelmingly joyful for her, that to just think about the simple fact that one day she woke up on a hay mat in the hood as an orphan, and then one night after that she went to bed in a palace as a queen. Like, that's a crazy thing to happen. So I'm sure she's very excited and enjoying her glory, her environment that she's in now. So the reason that she became queen was because God put her there on purpose. I'm sure she was cute, but the real reason was that God wanted her there, okay? The reason being is because the book of Esther goes on to talk about a man named Haman. Now, Haman was King Xerxes' second in command. I imagine probably his best friend. Okay, so Xerxes and Haman are besties, and Haman gets a privilege bestowed on him by the king, where the king says, you get to go out, go ahead, go take one of the royal horses, you get to go out in the street, and everybody has to bow to you, and it would be a nice experience for you, buddy, go on. So Haman gets excited, he goes, and what ends up happening is, as he's walking the streets, everybody's bowing to him. Oh, it's Haman, it's not the king, but okay, whatever, we'll bow. Well, Haman gets to Mordecai, and Mordecai doesn't bow. Mordecai's a Jew. He bows to God only. Who's Haman? So Haman gets very upset about that, and finds out everything about Mordecai. Finds out that he's a Jew. Finds out about the war, about the captivity, about all that. And Haman devises a plot to basically commit genocide, to kill all the Jews, all of them. He makes that plot. And because A, Haman is devious, B, he's second in command, very close to the king, he's able to do that. So he goes to the king, and he invents this story. He's like, king, you're not going to believe this, dude. You know what I just found out? I uncovered this conspiracy, dude. Like, there's so many people, dude, in your kingdom that want to kill you, bro. And it's one group of people. Let me just go wipe them out for you, and you don't have to worry about it. You can go back to bed. Don't even worry about it. And the king's like, true? There's people trying to kill? Yeah, go take care of that. So he signs the decree, the contract, and doesn't realize that he's just signed a contract that allows Haman to wipe out all the Jews. So now here's the pickle that they're in, because now there's a decree that says, I think it was about a year's time. In about a year's time, there's a day where all these soldiers are going to go and they're going to crush the Hebrews. And it's a really interesting thing about this specific pickle that they're in, because the thing about Haman is that Haman is an Agagite. It comes from Agag. You remember King Agag? Haman's an Amalekite. Same group of people. And now here he is, hundreds of years later, And now all the Jews are going to imminently be slaughtered and wiped out without leaving a trace, because Saul didn't listen and he wanted a sheep. This is the price. This is what happens when you don't obey God, when you do what you want, when you reject God. Okay? You are not the only one that suffers. If you come up with the excuse, well, if I don't listen to God, I realize I'll be passing on a couple blessings, but, I'm happy with my life the way it is, and I'm a simple man. Okay, are you cool with the fact that your kids are going to be dealing with the calling God has on their life and the calling that God put on your life that you rejected because you didn't want to? Are you aware of that? Are you aware that Saul disobeyed God because he couldn't be bothered, and 400, 500, 600, however many years it was later, hundreds of centuries later, a little orphan girl who just became queen can't even enjoy it because she has to put up with your nonsense. That's the price. So now Esther's in a spot, and Esther's talking with Mordecai, and Mordecai says, you gotta go before the king and ask him to do something. And the problem with that is that nobody, and I mean nobody, can enter the throne room and stand before the king unless the king invited them there. And Esther had not been invited. If somebody goes into the throne room without being invited, they get killed instantly. It's not even a question. You have no right to be here. This is a very serious thing. So Esther goes on a fast for 3 days and 3 nights. And she has a decision to make. She's like, okay, cool. So she was an orphan who, by the grace of God, was picked out of how many hundreds, thousands of women. She alone was picked to be queen. Xerxes was king over 127 provinces. That is a large area. She is a big deal now, and she can't even enjoy that. She can't even enjoy her tiara. She can't enjoy her pretty dress. She can't enjoy the nice meals. She can't enjoy the walk in the palace garden. She can't enjoy any of it now because Saul didn't listen. And now she has war to put up with. She has a tough decision to make. And so she fasts for 3 days, and she makes the decision, all right, I'm gonna go before the king. And she ends up going before the king, and he spares her. He doesn't kill her, and she's able to set up a time for Xerxes and Haman to meet with her, and she gets a little cold feet the first night, but she kind of reschedules it, and the second time she follows through with it. She tells Xerxes, look, Haman tricked you, man. She said, I'm a Jew, I'm a Hebrew, and Haman tricked you into signing a decree that's going to absolutely annihilate all my people, her included. It was kind of a crazy spot for Esther to be in too, when you think about it, because the decree was for every Hebrew to be killed. Esther was a Hebrew. How long would she have lasted? Could she have lied and said, no, I'm not a Hebrew? Maybe she would have got away with it. How long would that have lasted? She was either she had to pick, either you're gonna die or you're maybe not gonna die, but you're probably gonna die. And it was such a horrendous position to put her in, when she could have just been the queen and just enjoyed it and been a godly queen, and her entire life would have been, loving the king, giving him children, being a mom, having a nice life. And now she's got to risk dying, and there's all this war because King Saul wanted a sheep. And it really is that simple. And so the king, in the way that kings and kingdoms work, a king can't say, my bad, just kidding. He can't do that. He signed a decree. So what he ended up doing is he made a way out. He made a way for the Hebrews to defend themselves, and they were able to survive. And so this is what happened. You have Saul not obeying, and you have David and Queen Esther. Both have nothing to do with, God told Samuel to tell Saul kill the Amalekites. Nowhere in that chain of command was there any King David's or Queen Esther's. It had nothing to do with it. But here they are. They're paying the price for it all the same. And it's, you know, it's a hard truth about life that sometimes we're going to go through stuff that we genuinely do not deserve. That we are paying the price for something that somebody in our life didn't obey God, and now we have to suffer. You know, it's this story has kind of got two sides to it. You know, two main messages. Number one, do what God tells you. Okay, it's not just about you. It's about people around you, people in your life, people down the line that are going to suffer because you didn't. And the second main message in here is that even if you are one of the people that had someone in your life that disobeyed God, now your life is much harder, much more painful, much darker. Clearly, through the example of King David and Queen Esther, you can see that there's nothing that's gonna disqualify your pain. Okay, so what I'm gonna tell you that if you put God first and you focus on Him and you go to Him and you just keep focusing on God, you're gonna get through. And look at Queen Esther. You know, that was a scary thing. She almost died a couple of times because of the decree and because of going before the king. It was a scary time. It was a very terrifying time, but she made it out. And then after that, there's no more story in Queen Esther. You know, who knows how hectic her life may have been after, but you know, for all we know, after this happened, she went back to being queen, and she went back to taking her walks in the garden, and maybe she had a couple kids and she had a nice life, and God was able to bless her. It was a sort of a flare up. This situation was that she had to take care of. So, you know, if you put God first, even though you are suffering the consequences of somebody not obeying God, God will get you to a spot where you are better off. Okay? That's not for you to take this and go, okay, yeah, so I shouldn't feel bad. No, I'm not telling you that. I'm not telling you you shouldn't be crying. I'm not telling you you shouldn't be in pain. Tears and pain are very necessary in life. You know, Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was in tears, and he was in pain, and he was perfectly, directly in the will of God. You shouldn't deny yourself. So it's okay to cry. It's okay to be in pain. You're not wrong for hurting. Just understand, though, that it will get better, and all you got to do is put God first and keep obeying Him. And I hope this helps you, and I hope you all can learn from this. I know I did. But yeah, all right, everybody. So take care. All right, bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Let that garments always be white and the head lack no ointment.